Good morning. The ancient word this morning is from the book of Luke, chapter 9, verses 28 to 45. Now, about 8 days after these sayings, Jesus took with him Peter and John and James and went up on the mountain to pray. And while he was praying, the appearance of his face changed, and his clothes became as bright as a flash of lightning. Suddenly they saw two men, Moses and Elijah, talking to him. They appeared in glory and were speaking about his exodus, which he was about to fulfill in Jerusalem. Now Peter and his companions were weighed down with sleep, but as they awoke, they saw his glory and the two men who stood with him. Just as they were leaving him, Peter said to Jesus, "Master, it is good for us to be here. Let us set up 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah," not realizing what he was saying. While he was saying this, a cloud came and overshadowed them, and they were terrified as they entered the cloud. Then from the cloud came a voice that said, "This is my son, my chosen. Listen to him." When the voice had spoken, Jesus was found alone, and they kept silent, and in those days told no one any of the things they had seen. On the next day, when they had come down from the mountain, a great crowd met them. Just then, a man from the crowd shouted, "Teacher, I beg you to look at my son. He is my only child." Suddenly a spirit seizes him, and all at once he shrieks. It convulses him till he foams at the mouth. It mauls him and will scarcely leave him. I begged your disciples to cast it out, but they could not. Jesus answered, "You faithless and perverse generation, how much longer must I be with you and put up with you? Bring your son here." While he was brought forward, the demon dashed him to the ground in convulsions. But Jesus rebuked the unclean spirit, healed the boy, and gave him back to his father. And all were astounded at the greatness of God. While everyone was amazed at all that he was doing, he said to his disciples, "Let these words sink into your ears. The Son of Man is going to be betrayed into human hands." But they did not understand this saying. Its meaning remained concealed from them, so that they could not perceive it, and they were afraid to ask him about this saying. The contemporary word this morning is from the Buddhist tradition, from When Things Fall Apart by Pema Chodron. Spiritual awakening is frequently described as a journey to the top of a mountain. We leave our attachments and our worldliness behind and slowly make our way to the top. At the peak, we have transcended all pain. The only problem with this metaphor is that we leave all others behind. Our drunken brother, our schizophrenic sister, our tormented animals and friends. Their suffering continues, unrelieved by our personal escape. In the process of discovering bodhicitta, in Buddhist teaching, a noble or awakening heart, a tenderness for life, the journey goes down, not up. It's as if the mountain pointed towards the center of the earth instead of reaching into the sky. Instead of transcending the suffering of all creatures, we move into turbulence and doubt. We jump into it. We slide into it. We tiptoe into it. We move toward it however we can. We explore the reality and unpredictability of insecurity and pain, and we try not to push it away. It takes years. If it takes lifetimes, we let it be as it is. At our own pace, without speed or aggression, we move down and down and down. With us move millions of others, are companions in awakening from fear. At the bottom, we discover water, the healing water of bodhicitta. Right down there in the thick of things, we discover that love will not die. Well, good morning. It's a great pleasure for me to be here at the church today. This is my spiritual home and has been since I first came here in 1993. And it's a great pleasure this morning to talk about an important event in the Bible. The reading today from Luke's Gospel talks about the transfiguration of Christ, one of the most important events in the Bible, a glimpse of the divine, the Word of God, and an experience that clearly changed everyone that was present. The word transfiguration comes from the Latin root, the word trans meaning across, and figura meaning form or shape. It thus signifies a change of form or appearance, and this is what happened to Jesus in the transfiguration. His appearance changed and became glorious. The event ranks alongside Jesus' baptism, crucifixion, resurrection, and ascension in terms of its significance to the Christian tradition. And all of the major faiths talk about the transformation in glowing and wondrous terms. The Anglican tradition focuses upon this being God's chosen Son, the example that Christians may by faith behold the King in his beauty and express the hope that the faithful may be changed into his likeness from glory to glory. The Greek Orthodox tradition talks about metamorphosis. The Catholic tradition looks at the transfiguration as an important opportunity to believers to look to Jesus as the light of the world. In nearly all Christian traditions, this is a central event. And the story can be condensed relatively quickly in relatively condensed version. Goes something like this. Jesus and his disciples had been in an active period of ministry, and as was his habit, a number of times Jesus goes up to the mountain to pray. They probably assumed that this was one of his normal breaks. But then something different happened. Jesus' clothes became brilliant white, his appearance changed. When he had changed, Moses and Elijah appeared. They had a conversation. Interestingly, the conversation is about Exodus. It's not insignificant that Moses and Elijah are involved with a conversation about Exodus. Peter, who was always very quick and shot from the hip, often goes over the top, and he appears to do so once again. Let's build some tents. Let's put up a wonderful building. Let's celebrate this glorious, glorious occasion where Jesus appears with Elijah and Moses. And then, only for the second time in the Gospels, God actually speaks. This was his son, and he is well pleased. That's why he sends Moses, the keeper of the law. That's why he sends Elijah, one of the last of the great prophets. Moses, God has allowed into heaven. Elijah, you will recall from the book of Isaiah, said God sends a chariot of fire to take Elijah while he's still alive into the heavens. These are important symbols within the Jewish tradition, heralding the end of time. So the symbolism here, even within the Jewish tradition, is profound. So Jesus is seen as the fulfillment of law, the fulfillment of the promise that God has made to human beings. So far, everything I've said places Jesus at the front and center of this story. It's the story of magnificence, of blinding flashes of light, of transformation, the full religious cornucopia of glory, wonder, amazement, and veneration. But with so much in the New Testament, this story is not so much about Jesus as about us. Jesus would not let Peter memorialize the event in buildings, in institutions, in rules. Jesus well understood that in the transfiguration, they had left the others behind in Chodron's world. And at some point, Jesus would have to return. He would have to return to the drunken brothers, the schizophrenic sisters, the sick parents, the troublesome neighbors, the irritating co-workers, and all the others who were tormented and suffering. As the story unfolds, this is exactly what Jesus does. He gives up this glorious transfiguration and goes back into the valley. He becomes human again. He goes into the valley, and the first thing we're told in Luke is that he heals someone. He rebukes the disciples for not being able to do so. He resumes his journey to Jerusalem and the crucifixion. The message here is that Jesus can celebrate, and as we sometimes celebrate on the top of the mountain. It's very nice to be celebrated, to be adored. It's very nice for me to go to an academic conference and say, "Oh, Mike, it's good to see you. I loved your last essay. It was great," and blah, and we just fawn over each other. It's nice to see the way that great football players celebrate by saying, "Well, it's not me, it's the team," when they really know it was them. We like the adoration that comes from being on the top of the mountain. But Jesus recognizes that there's also weeping and great sorrow in the valley. He knows that our attempts to escape this earth are never fully recognized. So the connection here of this element of going back into the valley is well expressed by Pema Chodron in the contemporary reading. She, as we've seen, talks about spiritual awakening as frequently being described as a journey to the top of the mountain. But the suffering of others continues unrelieved, even as we attempt to find our own enlightenment, our own peace. We still have to live in that world as well. In a certain sense, then, what we have in the story of the Transfiguration is Jesus rejecting his own privilege. Recall that he is talking about the Exodus with Moses and Elijah, the established authorities in Judaism, the epitome of cultural and religious power and privilege in the Jewish tradition of which Jesus is a major part. The story could have ended right there. Jesus could have entered Jerusalem with Moses and Elijah in great clouds of white clothes, with the glory of God fully with them. He could have entered Jerusalem, changed the nature of Jewish tradition, brought about the end of the age. But Jesus doesn't do that. He absolutely doesn't do that. He turns his back on that privilege and goes down into the mountain, into the sorrows, into the weeping, into the pain of everyday people. Jesus chooses not to embrace the power of the mountaintop. And he insists that Peter, James, and John do not do that either. We must always, even with all of the adulation of the mountain, go back to rejoin our brothers and sisters and continue our journeys in whatever insecurities or pain or sacrifices we have to make. We only find the true love of being fully human, what Chodron calls the love that will not die, if we are willing to go back into the valley. The true love of God and of Jesus can't be found at the top of the mountain. It can't be found in the fawning praise of colleagues at work. It can only be found by going deep into the valley of solidarity with the poor and the disadvantaged, tending to their needs, and then by doing it again and again and again. It's interesting that in the Christian tradition, when we come very quickly towards Easter, Calvary is often seen as the navel of the earth, the legendary center of the world. And Chandran points us to the phrase, the mountain pointed towards the center of the earth. Jesus' crucifixion is a descent into turbulence and doubt, into the reality and unpredictability of our insecurities and pain. But it also reveals a love that will never die. So I want to suggest to you in this short reflection on the Transfiguration that we shouldn't necessarily be taken in by the interpretations of mainstream religious churches in terms of the glorification of Jesus, the deification of Jesus. Instead, I think that this story is an instruction to the disciples and to us to be wary of privilege, acclamations, and fawning at the top of the mountain. Love and joy are not there. They are found in the thick of things, as Pema Chandran reminds us. It's in the thick of things where the hard work of healing happens. Jesus' ministry is not transformative because of what he does on the mountain, but what he did in the valleys and the wilderness and areas elsewhere. It's interesting that when I was going home for my mother's funeral last March, almost a year ago, I flew into Heathrow and got on the train at Paddington and took the train to Cardiff. And the train is moving into Cardiff Central Station, and a few minutes before it stopped, I went and got my cases, and I was waiting at the door so that I could disembark from the train. And a lady standing next to me was obviously getting off, and I had been thinking of my mother a lot on the journey over. There's not much to do on a 12-hour flight than think. So I was distracted. And she asked me, she said, "Those are very nice cases." And we got chatting, and she said, "Are you here on vacation?" And I said, "No, unfortunately, I'm here for my mother's funeral." "Oh," she said, "I'm so sorry." And then she surprised me. She said, "Tell me about your mom." "Is she from Cardiff?" I said, "Yes." And I described, "Oh," she said, "I might know her. I'm from this area," and blah, 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 blah. And we were chatting for about 5 minutes as the train waited for its point in the station. And then the train arrived and the doors opened and everyone rushed off. And I'm struggling with my cases to get off. And then I looked up and the same woman is waiting for me. And she said, "Let me walk with you. Let me walk with you." And she walked with me to the elevator, and we went down, and we stood in the street outside the station in the cold March weather, just talking for 5 minutes. Then we bid each other goodbye, and we went our separate ways. But that phrase that she said has stuck with me. Let me walk with you. In one of my darkest moments, anticipating my mother's funeral, seeing my father and family in grief, this woman had the compassion in the bottom of the valley to reach out, to find something to touch me with love. And that, I think, is what we're required to do. I think that's what the message of the Transfiguration actually is. God is clearly speaking to us, as his exhortation makes clear. This is my son, my chosen. And then the next phrase is important. Listen to him. Listen to him. It's only by walking in the way of the cross, not by ascending to the top of the mountain, that we find the way of life, the way of peace, and that we will find a love that will not die. Thank you.